In this lesson, I'm going to talk to you about preventing bias in statistical studies. In a previous lesson, I pulled up this picture to show you some different types of selection bias. So you have to be very careful about bias in your studies, not only in the selection, but also in the response. And in the selection process, it's when you're choosing your sample. And then once you choose your sample, you have to be careful about how you collect data from them. So here's some examples of selection bias, and then I'm going to go into response bias. When the behavior of interviewers or interviewees yields inaccurate responses, we call this response bias. So a lot of this depends on what you're asking, the setting that you're asking it in, who you're asking. There's all kinds of things that can create confounding variables that we want to try to eliminate. And so if you can kind of set up a situation where it might help prevent the bias, like a neutral setting, or maybe conforming to the looks of whoever you're interviewing to make them more comfortable, things like that. There's some things you can do to kind of help prevent that. Explain why you might get a biased response from a question like, do you smoke marijuana? If you think about that for a second, depending on where you live, smoking marijuana or having marijuana might be illegal. And depending on where you ask that, like right now, who knows in the future, but right now in Texas, that's illegal. So if you go around town, out in public or at a restaurant or something, and you're asking people this question in public, they may not answer you accurately, truthfully. So you might say it could be incriminating. The information could be incriminating or embarrassing, depending on the question. So give another example of a question that you might receive response bias. Go ahead and pause it, try to think of one, write it down, and then come back. I wish we could talk about it. I love hearing what students say. One of the ones that comes to my mind is if you ask, have you ever cheated on a test? Whoops, that's a question. There we go. If you're a teacher asking students whether they've cheated on a test, then you're probably not going to get truthful answers, especially if you're asking students who you have in your class currently. Maybe they don't want to answer that because maybe they cheated in your class, or maybe they cheated in someone else's class and they don't want you to know. So anything like that where you're probably not going to get a truthful response is going to create response bias. Some other factors that contribute to response bias, I already mentioned a few. It could be incriminating information, embarrassing information, the setting of the interview. It could be the looks or appearance of interviewer. For example, if you go to a college and you're dressed up in like a suit and tie and they're all very casual, they might respond to you differently. They may try to kind of button up and respond professionally. Whereas if you maybe match how they're dressed, they might be more comfortable with you and they might answer more truthfully. Attitude, the location, the time, the type of people, anything like that, you have to be very careful about as you gather data on your subjects. That's all I have for bias. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'd be happy to help. See you in the next one.